Hello, I'm James Fitzsimons and welcome to The Career Scoop, a podcast all about career progression, advice and experiences aimed at assisting those who are in career transition. Today my guest is Karl Power. The first 20 years of Karl's career was working for companies, mostly in investment banks in Dublin, New York, London and San Francisco. He transitioned to an entrepreneurial career and consultant and continued to move around the globe, working on various projects. Currently, he is involved in investment banking and working and actively investing in US stocks. Recently, he moved to Barcelona. Karl, I'm delighted to welcome you to the show.
Thank you, James. I look forward to chatting with you.
You're based in Barcelona now, so what's the weather like there today?
Well, it's a little warmer than Dublin. It's probably 15 degrees, a bit cloudy. It's perfectly nice weather for this time of year.
Well, we're 2 degrees in Dublin, and it's just come out of lockdown, so we've a little bit of hope over here.
Good.
That's good. Right, this is my first question. I really appreciate you joining us this morning. Can you maybe give us a quick overview of your career today, the highs and lows, what you've learned, what are you most proud of?
Absolutely. So I grew up in a family where my father switched from big corporate life to entrepreneurial life. So I got a flavor for business early in life and kind of took a fairly steady route, did the BCom and did an MBS. And afterwards, in my first job, I actually studied accounting as well, management accounting. But during college, like a lot of us in those days, we paid our own way. And I had a few entrepreneurial gigs going on. I cleaned offices. But the one that was probably most fun was I actually had a market stall both in UCD and up in the Liberties in Dublin in the Meath Street markets, which some of your younger listeners mightn't remember. That was a Friday and Saturday and Sunday gig. And it was a great way to get money, to have pints, to have money for going out for pints with friends, etc. So, it got me a good sense of business, and you learned how to balance your costs with your revenues. And coming out of college in the mid to early '80s was also a high unemployment time in Dublin, and I think there was a huge emphasis on joining big business and having a bit of security. So I joined Smurfit's for a couple of years, and then I went into the investment management business with Allied Irish Investment Bank, and then via NCB onto Wall Street in New York, one of the big firms there. And then I moved on to London with a big American bank and got to be a partner in an investment bank in the late 90s, which was specializing in internet, and it was Internet 1.0. And biotech, and it was great fun. We started the London office, two of us, and we grew it to over 100 million in 5 years. I subsequently moved to the San Francisco office with them, and I put down roots at San Francisco. I left them after a year and started my entrepreneurial career. But having said that, I did stay in San Francisco for over 20 years. So it was a great experience. It was great timing. I got lucky in terms of, and I think luck is something that it's something people underestimate in the career. My timing in joining the investment world was superb. And until the market crashed in 2000, it was pretty much onwards and upwards the whole time. After that, I took a little bit of a career break, and one of my older boy has cerebral palsy. His name's Jack. He's a wonderful kid. He's in college himself right now, and I spent some time at home for a couple of years. But it also influenced a later decision that I made, which was to really try and control my career. So I ended up, and I'm still to this day doing this sort of thing. I either started companies. One of them, which was a therapy company, which I started and ran for 5 years. I had 40 therapists working for me in San Francisco. And they basically visited people in home, either aged people or disabled people. I ended up selling that business in 2016. And I did a lot of consulting work. Some of that involved travel. I lived in Mexico for almost a year. I was back and forth to London, working with London Irish Rugby Club for a period of time. And it was great work, but I also got to control my life to a larger extent. And as I went past 40, that became a big issue for me. It was something I really wanted to look after. I was lucky enough, I think, to make some good money when I worked on Wall Street. So I was also able to invest my own money in the public markets. And it's something I still do very actively today.
Wow, that's really interesting. I'm curious to, when you were investing in this internet all those years ago, did you have any clue as to where it would go to? Or what was the thinking back then? Can you share that mindset?
I think if I said I really fully understood what was going on, I'd probably be a billionaire hanging out with Putin and some other people on mega yachts at this point in time. So there was a recognition that there was a change of business, that digitization was changing the world. I mean, I know you and I love sports, and that, you know, how much has our sporting experience changed with the quality of camera work, and also with statistics and analysis and all that sort of stuff. So there was a recognition that communication had changed. You know, on Wall Street, you used to send out pounds of, or kilos, I guess now, of research every day. And then that just became an email in the inbox. So there was a recognition that there would be major communication changes. The recognition that we would move towards a world where 20% of the online sales or 20% of sales in 2020 would be online. I certainly didn't see that, but that's where we are. And
it's just interesting. So, someone who was back there and saying, right, could you have the visibility? Because it's all new. And of course, you have no reference points to make that deductions, of course.
A big difference, I think, between the Internet 2.0 and 1.0 is there was a lot of shitty companies that we brought public. I have to hold my hand up. There wasn't the companies, they weren't shepherded to a point where they were leaders in their space, and there was a clear winner, like now, where companies are going public. For instance, like Airbnb, and it's going public this week, where there's a clear winner in the space. You had a lot of crowding out going on, and it was very hard to figure out which of them was going to be the winner. Many companies literally went out of business. Their business models weren't good enough back then. So to find the winners in all that was tough, and it took years before it really became clear.
Okay, mistakes you've made, or you've been mistakes is probably the wrong word, but you know, where stuff didn't go the right way. I'm just curious. Can you share any examples?
I think it's fair to say I've made mistakes. I think generally I make mistakes. I have made mistakes where I haven't really analyzed the intentions of the people I've gone into business with, in terms of their integrity, in terms of them recognizing the sanctity of the actual company that we're working on, that they're more self-interested. And you get into situations where companies end up being badly run, and there's a lot of conflict. I've been on a couple of public company boards in the US, and one of them ended up in a very difficult situation where we had to take the management to court to fire them. And they subsequently turned around and fired the board, they turned around and sued the board, and we had to go to another round of courts, et cetera, et cetera. And we ultimately 100% prevailed, but I misread the guys. I looked at the business model and I thought, this is a fabulous business model. But if you don't have the right people in there and people that align with your own, you know, what you consider critical to how you work, it's not going to work. So that was a really good learning lesson for me, and I would categorize it as a mistake on my part. I probably should have known better.
And if you had your time again in that situation with the wisdom of age, what would you have done? Would you have brought guys out for lunch? Would you have played football with them? Would you just try to get to see what they're like as humans, or?
I probably wouldn't have got involved. You know, it was an interesting project. I got to raise capital for them. Their business model was in the company credit card business market. It was a good business. It was a very simple case of guys totally overpaying themselves, looking out for themselves, not looking out for the staff. They basically were in a situation where the business couldn't bear their costs. They had no interest in changing anything up. And so it became pretty obvious quickly. You know what? Sometimes you need to do those things, James, to learn about yourself too. So I'm glad I did it. I know that might sound bizarre to some of your listeners, but you learn so much in adversity about yourself and about what you want to do going forward. So yeah, it was an experience I needed to have.
Okay, I suppose that's the upside of any of these experiences we've had. It's, oops, I don't think I'll do that again, you know,
Yeah.
and things like that. If you could rewind the clock and coming out of BCom, UCD, would you do if you were to do something else? What might you have done? I mean, I give examples like mixologists. I myself retrained as a massage therapist 20 years ago, which is a fabulous experience. Photographer, professional golfer. You had, I suppose, you were selling bags in Dublin and then up in the Liberties. So maybe that's what you might have done. I'm just curious. Is there anything you would say, God, I'd love to have done this?
Well, I fancied myself as a decent soccer player. I played for UCD along the way and played up to a couple of years ago, which was one of the great loves of my life, getting out and playing soccer twice a week. But I knew I wasn't going to be at the next level. So I don't think that would be realistic. It was more of a childhood thing. I did toy with the idea of going into academia in UCD. I got a chance to join the business entrepreneurship department, and I looked at all the extra work that they were doing rather than the actual entrepreneurial side or the academic side. And I thought that could be interesting in terms of giving you access to lots of interesting projects in the world. But I can't say I gave it enough real thought. I'm kind of happy with what I did, James. I think I was set to go into the business world. As I mentioned earlier, because there was so much unemployment at the time and there wasn't a lot of capital floating around Dublin, I think going into corporate life was what I would do again if I was back there making the same decision.
Interesting. What team would you have liked to have played for if you'd got into the kind of Premier League? Who was the team that would sign you?
I'm afraid Manchester United have been my team since I was 7 years of age. Okay. Suffering through a slightly lesser glorious period right now, but it's still fun.
Well, you had from UCD Soccer Club, you had Kevin Moran, who played for Manchester United, who would have been kind of a number of years behind you, or ahead of you of shots. And then there was one other guy, Joe Hanrahan, who had a trial and turned down Manchester United.
Yeah, I actually played with him in UCD. He was my era.
I think he was the only guy who told Alex Ferguson, "No, I'm not interested."
Good for him.
When you are over the years, when you're recruiting people, what qualities do you look for in the people?
So, I you know what, the world has changed so much, but people don't change, and I think I clearly look for integrity. I think you got to look into people and see, are they going to be good corporate individuals? Are they going to align themselves with the company? Are they going to align themselves with their colleagues? Can you trust them? So that would be number one. The other things I would look for are resourcefulness. You don't want to handhold somebody and train. And I mean, Zoom is a classic, this COVID world we're in now, people need to be more resourceful than ever, especially younger people, because they're not getting on the job training the way they may have had in 2000 and way back in 2019. Character integrity is part of character, but there's also that people have a personality and that they will engage and get on with people. I think that's important. And that they have a drive. You want to see people who want to stick around and do things and make things happen. So they would be the key characteristics I would look for interviewing somebody, James.
Okay. And say, what advice, someone who's 22, 23 now, when they come out of university and the world is kind of locked down a bit, how do they knock on the door to get seen? How do they kind of push themselves forward? What tactics can you think of that they might use?
Interestingly, I would kind of go back to my last answer. I think young people today, they need to research what type of company they want to join and what characteristics those companies embody. And I think that's important because then at least they're aligned going into an interview process. There's no point some kid studying law deciding he wants to join some big legal company and he doesn't like to work very hard, or he doesn't believe in the capitalist system the way it's structured at the moment. So I think you need to do a little bit of soul searching in terms of figuring out who you are and what companies would align with you. I think you have a better chance then of getting the job, if you're actually at the right interview, if I can put it like that.
So that's kind of a bit of preparation, just standing back. What's your game plan? And now research is much easier because everything is at a press of a button, so you can actually get information, then put it together in some form, and then kind of like pre-season training or pre-game preparation, to go back to our love of soccer.
Right. Know yourself, know who you are and make sure you project, your ideals and your skill set. When you're at a meeting, don't just go in and answer the questions. What are the 3 things that you want to deliver in terms of a message to the people who are interviewing for the job? And I think that will bring you a long way. It will align you and it will put you in the right frame of mind to at least interview as well as you can.
Great. And say some of the people you've worked for and with over the years, the quality of the leaders. So are there similar qualities that make the great leaders?
There are a lot of things that people have in common. One is good communication skills. Let people know where the company's going, what you're doing, what people need to do to get there. Be clear with people in terms of what their roles are in that. And then there are other things which are the same in every aspect of life. Work hard, take pride in your job, be on time for meetings, be respectful of people. I think all those qualities go a long way if you're trying to be a leader. If you're asking people to do things you won't do yourself, it's never a good outcome in my book.
That's interesting.
Lead by example.
And you've worked around the world now. So you've worked in Ireland, UK, a bit of Europe, South America, North America.
Actually worked in India, James, for a few months.
In India as well. Wow. And can you compare, contrast any working styles or, just something to share, kind of, I haven't seen this before, I need to adjust a little bit?
Yeah, interestingly, I think working in Ireland, people are pretty collegiate. Actually even found that in England, even though I was working with a very international group of people. I was working for an investment bank called Merrill Lynch, who are now owned by Bank of America. And I would have been sitting with Danes and Swiss and Americans and everything. But the mixed culture was quite collegiate. I think in America, people have sharper elbows. No matter how well you're doing, everybody's looking over their shoulder to see how well everybody else is doing. And it does create a pretty alpha environment in my experience. And it's one you've either got to accept and go for. And it actually has a lot of benefits. It does get you out of bed early in the morning. And in my case, it was in work at 4:30 in the morning for 2 years in San Francisco.
4:30 in the morning. Wow.
7:30 New York time. We had to be there because of the stock market bell rang at 9:30 New York time. So yeah, we had an early start. In India, Indian people fall into 2 categories for me. They're some of the kindest, nicest people I've ever met. And then there's people who are in the more senior positions, probably because they've managed to scrape their way up there. There's a fair bit of corruption and two-faced activity. It was a very difficult experience. I was working on a company that was it was a mobile payments company. A lot of people in poorer countries don't have access to bank accounts, so they actually transact a lot of their banking through their phones. So you're dealing with the really, the rural poor people in a place like India. But the class system came out in spades there, and very interesting experience.
That's good. And to move to all these countries, you must have had to network, or did you know you were networking, or did you consider the word networking? I'm just to now it's the buzzword and LinkedIn, and I'm just curious, what was your thinking coming back from kind of mid-80s Dublin?
So I guess when I was in the corporate world, I did very little networking. My career kind of took care of itself, James. You'd move from one company, somebody would recommend you, you'd move to another one. And networking involved targeting clients and going out and chasing them. And it was a very direct approach. I think my networking probably began when I started working for myself, because I'm out hustling for work as a consultant to either small growth companies or to companies that are in trouble. And I've always had two jobs since I've been out working for myself. One is I've been running companies that I've started. I started a financial management company as well as the therapy company. But yeah, you've got to pick up the phone, call people, check in, tell them what you're doing, do your LinkedIn stuff, all of that. I actually think I'm pretty average at it. It's not something I thoroughly enjoy, but I recognize it has to be done. So I'll do what I can. In terms of getting some of the jobs, going to India, for instance, I was on a board and I recognized the US company, which was the controlling shareholder, was losing control of the company in India, and none of the other senior management would go there. So I basically said, I'll go. So it wasn't a case of networking; it was a case of somebody going over to there to do the job.
Okay, I sense there was a lot of hard tackles over there.
Yeah, there was, for sure.
Okay, interesting. And you talked about the therapy company that you sold in 2016, I think.
Yes.
Could you just share a little bit about what was that company about, and the idea of it, and just a little journey to the sale?
Yeah, so the journey started off as a personal one. My son had 2 or 3 therapists coming to the house for physical and occupational therapy on a pretty regular basis when he wasn't in school. And I figured out after a while that most of the therapists actually worked for one of the other therapists. So she had this small scale business going where she was taking a cut of the other therapist's business and going out and finding them clients, etc. So that was the quid pro quo, as they say. And so I approached her and said, what about we start a business and we go after corporate clients, either insurance, workers' comp clients, or we go to the big institutions around San Francisco that maybe people are living on site and in homes, or else they're just helping a certain element of the population through the government, through Medicare payments, et cetera, which is the government insurance healthcare system in the US. And we started pitching, and the business grew like a weed. We went from 3 therapists to 40 therapists within 12 months, and we were making a good living. It was very hard to grow it beyond that. This is an interesting lesson in life as well. Therapists are generally paid the same around the US, but it costs them 3 or 4 times as much to live in San Francisco as say, in Idaho. So therapists started leaving. We just couldn't find enough therapists to meet the need. So the business hit a growth ceiling. And James, once I hit the growth ceiling, I kind of lost interest, I'll be honest with you. So I sold it in 2016.
Okay, so that was a human business, and then driven by the economies of the costs.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You only need to get one thing wrong for a business to stall. I mean, the stall is a wrong word. It was very profitable, but just the challenge was gone. And I found a buyer very quickly who was in a related business who wanted to buy it. And so we did a deal within 6 weeks. I was able to be my own investment banker on the deal, having plenty of experience, and we got it done really fast.
Wow, that's a great story.
Yeah.
And you shared earlier that you took some time out because of Jack's illness and condition. And do you want to share, like, it was 1 to 2 years, and how did that, because you're working corporate, million miles an hour, and then moving across into that space, and what you took from that?
You know what, James? It was a very enjoyable time. It actually was more like 4 years. Did a couple of things here and there. Jack was born in a very fancy hospital in London, and there was negligence all around. So ended up fighting a court case on his behalf to set him up for, future financial support. And at the same time, I have another son, James. Good name. And I ended up coaching him, taking the kids to school. And it's not like I wasn't working, because I was investing in the stock market. The timing for me leaving was very fortuitous, because I left at the beginning of 2001, and investment banking was a horrible place for the next several years. There was a little bit of a lift, but till 2010, wasn't a great place to be, and a lot of work was being automated via the internet, et cetera, et cetera. So, the timing was good. And I took up running, and I enjoyed it very much. Living in California, a lot of outdoor stuff to do, a lot of hiking, and it was a good time. But you reach a point where you just want to work again, and that's when I got my horse and ended up moving to Mexico for the goods here, working on an airline down there.
And what was that like?
I found the Mexicans wonderful to deal with. They needed a fair amount of instruction, but they were friendly and helpful. And I went into an airline that was owned by someone who we were both acquainted with, Declan Ryan. He very kindly threw me in the mix down there. And it was at a time when the price of oil was going from like $40 a barrel to $140 a barrel. So it was all hands on deck in terms of really figuring out how to run this company as well as possible. It was a great experience.
But you knew nothing about airlines. I'm curious to that. So, hi, Karl. Listen, will you come work for us and do something? And obviously there was a much more granular. But how did you just arrive? Right, I need to learn about this business. I need to. So
yeah, you know what? There was a bit of patience with me for a few weeks, and I found a project for myself. There was tremendous competition. There was a lot of new startups. Carlos Slim, the wealthiest man in the world, had just started an airline, and there was some of the incumbents. They were being financed by the Mexican government, and the price of oil was going up. So I actually did a rebuild of the management accounting system down to the last item, which maybe you say the stairs that you bring up to the plane, buy versus rent sort of analysis. I did a deep dive into fixed versus semi-variable versus variable costs. And the outcome was very interesting. We found out the flights that we thought we were making money on, we were losing money on. The flights we thought we were losing money on, we were making money on when you did a proper allocation. So I think I could have done that in any industry, James. It was just a question of understanding the variability or fixed nature of costs and how to allocate them. So we got stuck in, and it was a very, very interesting exercise. It might sound boring to some of your listeners, but when you're getting into the weeds with a company, it's interesting. It's fun.
But being an outsider, you had, I suppose, you could ask that stupid question. is the plug in the socket.
Exactly. And, you also need to win people over. And it comes back to being yourself. Listening, I think, is the skill a lot of people don't have. Asking questions respectfully, because ultimately you're in there taking people's time from their day jobs when you're in there on a consulting basis. So being a consultant, you really have to win over people. It's critical because they don't want you there. And you take up more time, you take up resources, and you don't know as much as they do in terms of the granular element of the business. However, if you're smart enough and figure out, look, here's what I can bring value, you focus on that, and it works out. And people end up liking you and enjoying you and bringing you into other decisions just to have another sounding board in the company.
And I say, is maybe being Irish, does that help? Or is that me flying the green flag, maybe our disposition to people and we kind of get on with people?
James, I personally think it's a massive advantage being Irish in the business world. I think we smile more easily, we're more genuine, and we try and get to like people and know people a little bit, and it works. I mean, humans are humans. So, yeah, I would encourage people, Irish people listening, to go abroad at some point in time. It doesn't have to be the biggest job. It doesn't have to be the one that defines your career, but it's going to help you at some point down the line in a major way. You just don't know when and how, but it will.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I had a great experience myself, if I can share it, in Argentina, somewhere outside Buenos Aires, and we went to a ceilidh. And I said, what do you mean we're going to a ceilidh? So we didn't know what was going to happen here, some Argentinian thing, I thought. I turned up and I was at a real live Irish ceilidh with people who looked like me, Irish, who couldn't speak any English, and their forefathers came from Longford and Westmeath. It was an incredible experience. Just to hear the music, the fiddles, everything was the same. So, and then we came in, so we spoke, I have a little bit of Spanish, but not a lot, and they spoke in Spanish, and we had a few beers, and you get to talk, and then obviously the Argentinian personality, but it was just being that Irish and just being there was just a massive plus. And anywhere else I've traveled around the world, something being Irish, we travel well, or we leave good footprints, I think.
I think we do. I think it's because we're honest, we're legitimate. We're not trying to be something we're not, and we're friendly, and people appreciate that.
So, as you come into the kind of the third half of your working life, Karl, what's the next couple of years look for you? What projects would you like to do? Whose companies would you like to make better? Are there any particular sectors? I'm curious to. From the point of view, if there's some fella running a bag shop on UCD or up and can fly you in, and you can help him monetize that better and sell better.
Yeah, so I am very much industry agnostic, James. I've worked in many different industries. I would want to work with people that want to grow their business or want to make it survive and are willing to make the personal sacrifices to do so. You think about it, if you're going into a troubled company, you're actually another cost at a time when everything they're watching is their money. So there's a difficult balance there right away. But if people recognize that they can't do everything and that you can help them, that's the main thing for me. I spend a lot of time actually working full time on the phone and on Zoom now. I'm actually working on a project in the US right now. So I'm also probably location agnostic. I do like the idea with something you're doing as well. I'm probably old enough gray hairs to get into the advisory business in terms of helping people with their careers. So that's something I'm contemplating. How could I do that as a side gig?
Well, I suppose you're sharing your story is the first part, but also it's enabling people to have the confidence of their own abilities and knowing where they're kind of where they're at the kind of edge of the cliff to hold off a bit and then learn a bit more and then go a bit further.
Yeah, it's also sometimes people are so stuck in the weeds in their own business. They don't see the opportunity they have, or they don't see the risk that is out there, or they don't see the imbalances that are in their businesses. That if they were righted, they'd be so much more stronger and in position to grow and make a better life for themselves. So there's always different challenges, and often you go in, you think it's one thing, and you end up finding it's something else that you can bring value to the situation.
It's a big thing. And Karl, listen, I'm very conscious of your time, and I really appreciate what you've shared today for our listeners. It's really interesting, from selling bags and UCD to giving back, maybe on the other end, and projects around the world. I was going to say gig economy, but I think you invented the name gig economy before it was called the gig economy all those years ago. And my last question is, living in Catalonia, in Barcelona, what's that like? And working from there, and
I guess there's a couple of things. One, beautiful place to live. I mean, I lived in Valencia for the last 2 years, so I ended up, after I left India, myself and Heather, instead of moving back to the US, my kids are now in post-grad, so they don't need daddy on their shoulder all the time. We moved to Valencia for 2 years. It was quite a provincial city, for a decent-sized city, same size as Dublin. None of the aspects of Dublin. Slower, much more Spanish. Barcelona it's a very international city. A lot of English speakers here, a lot of people from all over the world. Spanish still have a different work ethic. I'm a full believer in the work-life balance. I think they take the life part very, very seriously over here. So working with the Spanish people can be a little trickier than working with other people, because they don't necessarily have the same sense of urgency as you or I might around a project. One piece of advice I would give to young kids in terms of going to work is be on time, listen, put your phone down, do what you say you're going to do it on time and do it well. I think there are important things. Spain can be a little bit frustrating in that front. I don't know how long I will call it home, but for now, loving it.
That's great. Again, Karl, listen, thank you so much for joining us today on the Career Scoop. It's always good to talk with you. Thanks, Karl.
Thank you, James.
Thank you for listening to the Career Scoop, brought to you by Elevate Career Advice and Elevate Executive Selection. I'm James Fitzsimons, and I hope you have enjoyed listening. Make sure to tune in for more new episodes of the Career Scoop. Thank you for listening.